Hello, everyone. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Today, our guest is an investment banker and exit advisor who's worked with many businesses, especially their owners, to extract value from their businesses because, after all, it's their biggest asset. Today, joining us will be Cliff Olin, Managing Director of Olin Capital Advisors in Binghamton, New York, which is about 2 hours west of Albany in upstate New York. And so let me welcome Cliff Olin to our podcast. Cliff, welcome. Thank you for making the time for our listeners.
Pleasure to be here, Jose. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're in Binghamton, New York, so that means winters get pretty rough there, but it's also very beautiful in the spring. So has spring sprung yet?
Spring is threatening to spring. It's still a little snow out there, but yeah, it's coming. We've heard.
Right, the snow kind of stays on the ground for a while, right?
It does. This is the brown season, we call it, the mud season.
The brown season. Okay, that's cool. Well, yeah. But I know it's beautiful country out there, and when you get there at the right times of year, it can be really enjoyable. Having spent some time up there myself. Well, Cliff, I think just to give some context to our listeners, maybe just say it this way. I introduced you as an investment banker, an exit advisor, and I know you do a lot of other things with business owners, but who do you typically work with?
So we do two things: capital raise for startup companies. But what we're going to talk about today, I think, and most pertinent is small businesses or medium-sized businesses that are closely held, either a single owner or small group of owners, family ownership, and somewhere between 2 and 50 million in revenue. It varies. I can go above or below that, but That's usually the sweet spot.
Okay, so very much still a family affair, or very much the owners punching the clock too every day.
Absolutely. Okay. They're involved.
They're involved. All right.
Yeah.
And what do you see, when you look out at this, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges they're facing, especially, we're coming out of COVID. We're not out of it yet, but we will be at some point. And they were facing challenges pre-COVID, right? I mean, it wasn't like everything was peaches and ice cream at that point. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that people are facing that they're asking you about, or what did you just see that they're dealing with?
Usually it's a transition timing issue that I see. The baby boomers are aging, as you know, I'm going to include us in there. We're a huge demographic, and moving through the ecosystem and deciding when to transition out of your business, trying to decide when the best time to do that is a real challenge for people, business owners, because they're, salt of the earth, make things go, and they just don't know how to, I don't want to say give up, but move on to the next challenge life has to offer them.
So that presents a challenge to, let's say, their current operations. How?
Well, a lot of them fall out of the growth mindset. So, in business, if you're not growing, you're dying, basically. So if they go into, I call it maintain mode. In other words, they don't want to take any risk or very little risk, and they stop looking at growth opportunities. They stop trying to make the business better. They can end up destroying value. They can end up, in some cases, making the business unsaleable at some point. So there's definite danger to mistiming it or not being prepared for that transition.
Wow. So now I'm sure there are owners listening now thinking, no, I'm running my business fine, and we're doing, we do what we've always done and so on. So what would be some telltale signs or symptoms that maybe they've taken their foot off the pedal more than they think they have?
Yeah, that's a great analogy, taking your foot off the pedal. It's usually it's an attitude, and we're all getting older by the minute, whether we like it or not. So you tend to become more conservative as you get older. Maybe you're less likely or have less of a need to make that extra dollar and so on. So they just become a little complacent and look at maintain mode versus grow mode, and things start to fall off the radar screen. They just, I don't want to look at that new product line, or I don't want to look at that different look. Why do I need another location? I'm doing okay. Well, maybe you are, maybe you don't need the other location, but there's usually some underlying currents that are taking you towards the more risk averse side that maybe you don't need to be on or shouldn't be on.
So that raises a question, because a lot of the folks I end up working with, and I'm sure you do too, are very much classically into B2B spaces. So they're selling. And often, if they're a $20 million company, they're selling to a multinational. They're selling, they're part of an ecosystem of manufacturing and so on. So what we've seen happen, and I'm sure you see this as well, is that that company, the guy you described, the guy or gal that you described, that's kind of like maybe slowing down just a little bit, not pushing as hard. But my sense is that the big industrials that they sell to are pushing very hard to squeeze. It's a global marketplace, so they're actually expecting more and more and more efficiencies, more cost savings, and so on. So is that something you see where people also wake up, like they get awakened by we're canceling our next year's order from you because you can't compete?
Yeah, and it's the nature of the beast, right? You're dealing with publicly traded companies that answer to the stockholder and so on, and it's a perpetual entity, so they don't have the luxury of just kind of taking their foot off the gas and coasting for a while. So I find a lot of these multinationals or large corps are really looking hard at their supply chains and even looking at their transition plans of individual supply chain members to say, hey, you're a key supplier for us, and we see you're reaching late 50s, early 60s. What are you going to do? I mean, we don't want to get caught with our pants down if you decide, next year that you're done, or maybe some health issue or whatever it might be. So even they will push their supply chain, which are these small business owners, to have some type of plan in place to say, yeah, I've looked at that, I'm ready for it, and we can go when we need to.
So that's not, although that's deeply personal. I know for a lot of owners, that's like very personal. It's like asking them, what their bank account number or something.
Yeah.
But you're saying, and what you've seen, and I've seen it as well, is that these larger companies that they may depend on for their business are actually starting to ask those kind of personal questions. They're saying, okay, yeah, it's personal, but we need to know too.
Exactly. And depending on the relationship, whether it's a franchisee or just a supply chain partner, some of these small businesses, we'll call them, that make 20, $30 million a year in revenue, are key suppliers to these big guys, and girls, and they need to be sure that there's some continuity there and some smooth transition in place. So it's certainly an issue you got to look at.
So if you're an owner of this, let's again, this prototypical $20 million company, you have some large multinational clients. You probably have a bunch of other local businesses and so on. Maybe you're listening to this and you're saying, okay, maybe I have taken my foot off the pedal, but life is still good, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What would you say are some common mistakes when people say, well, but I got to address it somewhat, right? So let's say somebody say, I got to look at this idea. So let me jump at it. Let me buy a book. Let me download. Let me search something on the web. I mean, what are some of the more common mistakes you see when people try to address this? Even if they accept it, that I should do something.
Yeah, that's the big deal. And maybe I'll just back up and say, not everybody's willing to accept it. You're in the business. We have that joke that you're going to exit your business one way or another, whether you walk out or they carry you out, one or the other. So just not accepting the fact that it's coming. Usually I get the phone call because there was some seminal moment that the business owner had. Maybe a family member passed or had a health issue, or maybe one of their friends, or maybe a customer that a longtime customer left, or there's some regulatory change and they just can't stand it. They kind of throw their hands up and say, that's it, I want out. I get that phone call where it's like, if you could have sold this for me 6 months ago, I'd be happy. So I get that. But then on the other end, the owners that try to jump into it, it isn't rocket science at the end of the day, but it's a fairly complex process that has to happen, and it looks at all facets of the business. So certainly nobody should be more familiar with their business than the owner, but bringing somebody on who knows what they're doing, or at least understanding how you have to orchestrate your individual professionals that help you, your accountant, your attorney, and so on, is kind of important there. And if they can serve that role themselves, and good for them. A lot of people don't have the time or the patience to do that. So that seems to happen.
But I got to imagine that process, because you said it's fraught with, it may not be just an owner. It could be an owner and her sons and in the business, for example, and maybe there's a minority shareholder that used to work, there's a cousin or something like that, all these complications.
Yeah.
So doesn't it get kind of personal and kind of like emotional?
It's extremely difficult, and bringing in a third party usually can wring some of that emotion out, even in just a straight M&A, where the company either doesn't care to become better prepared for the transition, or they're pretty good shape to begin with. Wringing the emotion out of the deal is extremely important when you're talking to a third party buyer who, despite the fact that you've run the business for 30 years and it's always paid your bills and done well and so on, there's risk involved with any business. So a third party buyer coming in doesn't see that, but the owner, because they're emotionally involved, can't get past the fact that the new buyer thinks there's some risk involved here and isn't willing to pay, 10 times revenue or whatever their metric might be that they think they can get. So
Well,
that seems to become an issue.
it reminds me, we had they're still friends, a long time ago, in a different part of the country where we lived. They bought a house, let's say for round numbers, they bought a house for like 250,000, and the market heated up and it got up to like 500,000, and he wanted to sell. And the wife just said, no, I want 750. The market and everybody, and they, mark to market and so on. It's 500,000, not 750. They hung on to 750 no matter what, which is, a huge premium because they believed. Mm-hmm. Well, turned out they ended up moving, renting the house. 20 years later, they sold the house for 750, but it was 20. The market caught up.
Yeah.
And they actually felt like they knew it all along. It was worth 750.
Yeah, time value of money, I guess, doesn't come into some people's thinking. But yeah, I get same thing. Business owners have this, Jill at the country club or Joe at the country club got 4 times EBITDA or cash flow, and that's what I should get. Well, no two businesses are the same. They don't have the same risk profiles. They don't have the same, it isn't made up of the same type of metrics. So you just can't. I get that a lot. So, Jill, Joe, whoever got 4 times, so I should get 4 times. Well, maybe you should. Maybe you should get 5 times, for God's sake. I don't know. But before we look at it, there's some parameters, but every business is different.
So just kind of taking a step back, even from like not necessarily because somebody listening to this might say, well, I'm not ready to get out of my business. Why should I do any of this? Are there any upsides to kind of going through this kind of process of thinking about your business, maybe having to exit, even if you yourself don't feel like you're anywhere near wanting to do it?
Absolutely. Well, the process itself will optimize the business from the get-go. So you'll look at it from a more holistic standpoint and try to look at it in the eyes of a third-party purchaser, whether you want to sell it today or 3 years from now or 5 years from now. So that's certainly one advantage. It'll make the business more efficient, run better, and you may be able to identify some weaknesses that you need to address. The other thing it does is in today's day and age, there aren't a ton of good businesses out there. When by good, I mean highly saleable and highly sought after. And I'll give you an example. I'm working on a buy side for a large multinational machining company, and they have given me a list of 10 companies they'd like to talk to about buying them. And none of them are listed for sale. So I'm going to call out of the blue and say, hey, somebody wants to talk to you about buying it. And most owners will be like the deer in the headlights look and say, oh my God, no way. Or, now that you mention it, let's talk. So having that in a constant state of readiness, within reason, constant state of readiness is a big advantage in case some scenario like that comes up where that you can say confidently, all right, this is my ballpark, and let's continue the conversation if you agree.
But Cliff, one thing that maybe it's an and, not a but this thought: if you're working on getting your business like organized, there's a certain amount of like legal due diligence, making sure you can document everything you claim and certify and all of that. Mm-hmm. But is there an immediate, or can there be an immediate P&L payoff to attending to some of these things? I mean, are there opportunities to actually just make, like, the things I have to do to get it ready for sale, even if I'm not going to sell it, will increase my enjoyment? It's kind of like, if I change the windows on my house, it'll help me when I sell my house, but I'll also enjoy better windows and better circulation and so on. So it's kind of, I'm just wondering if you've seen that phenomenon.
I have seen that, and that's a great point. And you probably have talked to people and helped them with this, in that what I'd love to see is the owner, the longer they own and the more they look at it, it takes them less time to manage the company. So rather than putting in 60 hours a week, maybe they go down to 30 hours a week, where they only have to spend that amount of time. They're only working on high level stuff, big time strategy for the company, getting new customers on board, looking at a new product line, versus down in the weeds, answering the phone and running the forklift and things like that. So that's a huge issue right there, and trying to optimize the business so that the owner can spend less time. So, I don't know, from my standpoint, that looks like a win-win to me.
Well, especially, we were talking before about we've had a conversation around grandkids, right? Enjoying those moments in life.
Yes.
Because and I've met the person I know is saying, if I stroke out at my desk, it's okay because it's where I'm happiest. And, there is that person, but thankfully not that many. Most people realize, okay, there's a little work-life balance we got to have here.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and leaving the headaches for your family members is just not cool. Well, I'll take a shot at that. Is whether it's your spouse who has little involvement in it, or maybe your family, everything's in turmoil. If that happens, you lose control, and everything in control. A lot of business owners are control freaks anyway, but losing that one aspect, you have control. You don't have control over maybe the economy. I know you don't. Hopefully you don't
mhm.
control over the economy, or control over maybe how your particular industry is doing, but you do have control over your exit plan or your transition plan. So if you're willing to just take a chance and stroking out the desk, could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, you lose that one aspect of control, which seems silly to give up to me.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this then. If you had to think about a number one tip, like if you were talking to, I mean, you are right now through this podcast, talking to owners of businesses kind of in a spot that you talked about. And you said, like, if there's one thing you'd say, listen, you could do whatever you want to do, but you should probably do this. And maybe not something huge, but something small that might make a difference. What would that be?
I guess accept your mortality and the fact that you may want to do something a little bit different for a little while. I talk to owners all the time, and I don't get too hard into the psychological side of it. It's just not my forte. I'd rather bring somebody else in. But owners that go from 100 miles an hour running a business to zero, and I like to golf, but I can only golf a couple times a week. Traveling again, you got to have something that you want to do that'll occupy you, make you content, satisfy you when you're done. So I would just say start looking for that transition into, maybe you want to buy another business. That's fine, whatever you want to do, but just have something in mind that you can kind of off ramp yourself and slow down a little bit if you want to. Uh, that'd probably be my big advice.
Well, yeah, because I could see somebody best day of their life I've heard is the day, I sold a business. Worst day of my life was the day I sold my business. And same
Yeah.
day, same business, because
Mhm.
it left them kind of they're puttering around. This is true of anyone entering into retirement kind of thing.
Mhm.
But especially business owners who have been working so hard, probably for so long, and to just turn that off.
Yeah. They don't know any different. Absolutely.
Right. So to
And
have
then go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, and then you've always got the issue, and thankfully, in most transitions or M&As where there's a third party buyout, there's a transition period of 6 months to 12 months where you, as a former owner, will assist. You go in the office, and it slowly tails off. Well, occasionally the other spouse isn't quite ready for the business owning spouse to be home all the time. So it leads to some interesting situations once in a while. It's like, well, I didn't really know what to expect to have, my spouse home all the time once he sold the business or she sold the business. So that's always a kind of entertaining. I try to warn people about that to start preparing.
Well, it seems like such a theme of what you described is for somebody who likes control. And I think if you build a business, you're a detail oriented person. You're focused on making sure all the things are done right
Hmm.
for you to be successful. Um, so I think the thought that I had here is that control is also thinking about, and we can't predict the future. Like we can't control COVID, we can't control the weather. All those things are beyond our control. But that which is in our control, or some of these things that you've described, are things I could decide to do if I wanted to and start paying attention to it.
Hmm.
So I guess the question I'd have for you, Cliff, is does this have to be a huge and onerous process, or can it be something that can be teased in over time?
The farther ahead you plan, the more it can be teased in over time, and it can become a part. It's almost like a best practice audit, if you will, so that if you can do it over time and maybe realize what product lines are really making you money and which ones aren't, just because you started to look at how a third party buyer would look at this and look at price allocation and income allocation and so on. So a lot of these things can really add to the value of the business, decrease the amount of time the owner needs to spend managing the business. They're just going to work on high level stuff and then make you in that constant state of readiness. So if somebody does come along and makes you an offer you can't refuse, then you take it. Or then ultimately to say, all right, a year from now, I want to be out of my business. So I need to start the process of hiring somebody to help me sell it and so on.
Gotcha. All right, great. Well, first of all, Cliff, this has been incredibly helpful, very, I'm sure, useful. And what I love about the things you shared is that they have application whether you're ready, whether you're on the exit ramp or you're 50 miles away from the exit ramp. These are like good things to do. So I just want to ask you, do you have any kind of resource or anything that you would want to direct our listeners towards that you could maybe offer? I don't know if it's a book or something like that, or a cheat sheet, anything like that.
Yeah, book's on the list, but I haven't quite got to it yet.
Uh,
Good for you. Kudos for you for
yeah.
putting one out, or more, maybe more than one. I would say two things. One is I'm always happy to talk an initial conversation with people. I don't charge for that. I like talking with business owners. It's fun. I was a business owner. I started and ran 6 small businesses myself. And the other is on my website, there's quite a few flow charts that I put together that to try to simplify some of the processes like the M&A process and so on. So I can give people some comfort level as to there's some standardized process in place there that they can expect, and maybe a timing issue and how long things are going to take.
Now I'll add a link to your site on our show notes, but could you just call out your domain name so we can have it?
Sure. It's olincapital.com.
Oh, that's
Pretty
great.
straightforward. My last
Okay.
name. I'm not an egomaniac, I swear, but I did name it.
Fantastic. Well, Cliff, this has been very helpful. Thank you again for making the time, and really appreciate your insights here. And I'm sure our owner listeners did as well.
My pleasure, Jose. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.